Cool. So I'm going to be, kind of be on the presentation initially. So I'm not going to be seeing the chat, but yeah, we'll do questions anyway at the end. So the way this is going to work is the agenda. First 10 minutes, I'm going to be doing a quick presentation to just set the context for everybody and introduce, what's going on in space and what is the market, why now, and things like that. And then for the next 30 to 40 minutes, we will have a discussion with Joanna and Bharat. And then for the last 15 minutes, we have some time for questions. So I wanted to start with a quick presentation. And so yeah, I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Aravind. I'm the founder of Terawatt Space, which is an independent advisory firm. And I also have a newsletter. I also have a podcast, all of them focused on space, of course. And I'm here to present you quickly what's going on with space and why it's going to be the next trillion-dollar economy. And just to get started, so this image is from SpaceX. So one is real and one is not. That's kind of where we hope to be in a few decades, I think. And it's interesting that we're living in times where you can kind of think like that of the possibilities of space. Cool. So I discussed the agenda with you already. In case you joined late or you did not really hear that. So I'm going to present a quick context of the space industry to start with for the next 5 to 7 minutes, and then join the panel discussion. I'll moderate the panel with Joanna and Bharat. I'll let them introduce once we get to the panel session, so you know who they are, and then we can have a Q&A. All right, moving on. So first, to start with, what is the space industry? Because people talk a lot about the space industry, and some of you might not be aware that this is an industry after all. You might just be thinking it's about going to Moon and Mars, and it's just space agencies. Well, you might have seen the recent news of the companies operating in that space. So space is an industry after all, and there are also kind of controversies around what is the space industry. Traditionally, what the space industry is the manufacturing of satellites, launching the satellites, getting the data down from the satellites. That's the ground segment. And then the biggest part of it is the satellite operators and the satellite service providers. So satellite operators are the ones who operate the satellites and get them ready for the users to use it. So you can think of as an example here of television, which is not that useful anymore because we're all watching Netflix, but still you can still apply the same concept to it. You get the satellite manufactured. A company like Airbus or Boeing usually does that, and then there's launch. Obviously, you should have been aware of SpaceX, and there's the ground segment part, which is usually not talked about a lot, and that's being done together with the satellite operators. So there are operators like SES in Luxembourg, Intelsat, Eutelsat, and again, this is kind of where SpaceX wants to be because they are manufacturing their satellites for internet, launching them, operating them, and then they're also finally selling the internet to people. So, the SpaceX wants to be all of them. So just to give a quick example. And what is driving the market today is the commercial market is going up. Clearly, you see in the last 5 years, commercial, it's starting to become the biggest chunk of the satellites being launched. And I mentioned there's a controversy around what is called the space industry. And you guys know the logos of the apps here. You might have not kind of thought about them, but they are also some people consider them to be part of the space industry as well. Is that right or not? We don't know, but if you use Uber, you use Google Maps, and Google Maps uses GPS, which is a satellite, and it can be considered part of the space industry. Same with all other apps that you use. So you can argue that everything that you use today in terms of the apps, if it's as a location service, it's part of the space industry. That's a food for thought for you to imagine. But then the point is, even traditionally, space is a big industry, and it's only expected to grow. And grow how much? Well, Morgan Stanley predicts that the space industry is going to reach 1 trillion by 2040. And what is part of the 1 trillion is consumer TV, so TV that we have direct TV services, it's going down, but it's still a big market. Sports, if you think live events, it's all done by satellites. So that's going to be a big part of the market. And then another big part is broadband. 49% of the world is not connected today. And there's a good chance that they will probably be connected only by space. So, there's satellites there as well. So that's a big chunk of the market. And then one that, keeps on increasing, the green part that you see, is called second order impacts. So by second order impacts, I mean things like Google Maps, things you cannot directly associate with space, but they are second order, they are indirect benefits. So that's going to be a huge market as well. And we're going to be discussing about, some of those markets in the panel discussion. And if you look at it, these are all markets for Earth. We have not talked about markets in microgravity, which is probably going to be what Joanna has more information about. We have not talked about markets on the moon, markets in outer space. So just focus on Earth. The market is expected to reach 1 trillion in 20 years' time. And just looking at investments as well, it's been growing, right? It's true that there are only a couple of companies that are kind of taking 50 to 60% of the funding: SpaceX, OneWeb, and a few others from Amazon, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin. But still, a growing investment market, and it's growing all around the world. It's not just in North America; it's growing all around the world. So I thought this would be a good context to kind of put you all in the same position of what is the space industry and what is going on with the space industry. And now I want to talk in the panel discussion about what our future in space is going to be. For that, I'm going to also invite my co-panelists, Joanna and Bharat. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah. Can you hear us?
Yeah, brilliant. So maybe, I just gave a quick introduction presentation there so that, the audience are all good with what the space industry actually means. Now, moving on to the panel discussion, I wanted to first, start with introductions from yourself and Bharat. So maybe, Joanna, if you can go first.
Sure. Thank you, Arvind. Thank you, Sabri, for organizing and introducing this. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ivana Kozmuta. My focus is on space. I've worked at NASA for over 15 years. I left in 2018. While I was at NASA, I was one of the latest assignments was to make space manufacturing profitable, and then I saw an opportunity in this, and then I left to create a startup, G-Space. But my background is very broad. I have a PhD in physics. I worked in a lot of industry application, particularly in material science related. And during my time at NASA, I worked both in science, engineering, and then, in three areas: science, engineering, and commercial partnerships. Definitely was very beginning with, I think, 2007. I became a very strong enthusiast of supporting the new space and the commercial space ecosystem. So that was very, very early on when we were talking about commercialization and being part of that. I think a historic shift that we all experience today. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to talk about anything from the lens of space, creating this space-Earth synergy, to space manufacturing and beyond.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, in the presentation, I just touched on, like I mentioned, market for the Earth, but then you're going to have a new economy for market in space, in orbit, and yeah, we're going to discuss that. Bharat, do you want to quickly introduce yourself? And
sure. Yeah. So first of all, I must say I'm not in the space right now, blacked out. So for some reason, my camera is not working. So just want to make sure that everyone knows I'm on Earth right now. I'm based out of Luxembourg. So completely on the other side of Joanna, with whom I've been interacting since last couple of years, or at least 1 year. So my background is, so I'm coming from, I'm an engineer. I've done my engineering in India in information technology. Then I've done my MBA from Frankfurt University, and I was fortunate enough to finish my executive doctoral program from École de Ponts, where I focused on the space industry. So my experience of last 15, 16 years, I've been into corporate entrepreneurship, strategy, digital transformation, and all those topics. I've worked across various industries, specifically into IT, technology, consulting houses, and since last few years, I've been with manufacturing industry. So I'm part of a group called Aparam, where we make stainless steel. So why space? I mean, I've been always, since my childhood, ever excited about space. And I see this as one of my personal responsibility, apart from many of you who must be attending the conference here, is to take the baton and tell the world that, yes, the other people who are bringing different kind of outside in perspective are also welcomed in the space industry. So I've done a lot of consulting assignments during my time in consulting industry with the space industry, specifically with the satellite companies. And while working with these guys, I realized that these companies are as human as I could imagine. So they are not the scientists and rocket scientists roaming around. They have exactly same problems that we have in any entrepreneurial projects. So this was one of the reasons I took my learning from whatever I've learned in different industries and satellite industry, and started to focus on my research in the new space areas. So where I was looking into entrepreneurship, emancipated entrepreneurship, specifically business model innovation, and how can we bring in more entrepreneurial activities in the new space segment is what I've been looking for. And I'm really, really honored to share this space and looking forward to have this discussion with all of you here. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks for the introduction, both of you. And yeah, Bharat, you mentioned, it's also my story. It's, I don't come from the space industry. I've only been in the space industry for the first 5 years. And I found that, a lot of people who are entering the space industry come from elsewhere, and they try to apply their learning from other industries into the space industry. Just to get the discussion started, maybe some people here are also thinking of the same question, which is why I'm going to ask you this as well. I touched on this a little bit in the presentation, but why do you think we are hearing about the space industry so much these days? What has changed? We've been, going to space for 60 years, 70 years, 60 years now. And, in the last 10 years, what has really changed? Why are we hearing so much about it? Maybe, Yona, you can start and give your perspectives.
Sure. So I think it's been a historical shift in the way space is being operated, right? The first endeavor into space happened in 1957, right, with Sputnik. And then 1967, we saw the first commercial satellite. But traditionally, it's been more of a military defense security, how should I say, endeavor. And it's been operated by government for the government. And by government for the government does not necessarily include, most of them actually does not include civil society. And it's kind of secretive, right? Now, I believe that NASA and several other space agencies have emerged in the late 60s and have created a great opening. But where we really see this inflection point in the space economy is, like I said, maybe 2005 timeframe, with the commercial orbital transportation system, the COTS program, where there was the first example, powerful example of a public-private partnership And by including the commercial and having the commercial be part of it, not only we make space more accessible, more affordable, but we also open the door to communicate more about the value of space and where all these billions of dollars of previous investments have gone, and how can we now what has been happening in space, where the investment happened in space, and what the value of those are to the society at large. It's not like they didn't happen, but they weren't really, I think, the storytelling around what that meant, and how those investments infused in society and are actually being part of our daily basis. Most people are not even aware, right? That we use a space investment in making our life easier here on Earth. So I think two trends here. Yes, one, the fact that government realize it's time to lower the barriers in terms of accessing space because of desired or necessary need to commercialize. And then B, also the fact that terrestrially, we are more of a connected society. So through social media, we can push more of this storytelling and information out there. And yes, so we see more and more of involvement of the civil society at this point.
Bharat, what do you think?
Yeah.
Do you have other perspectives?
I'll add something to it. So I completely agree to what was mentioned. I specifically believe whatever I've studied and seen, a lot of credit goes to NASA and COTS program that they had released, which changed things. But just to give another perspective, I also believe it was just a natural growth trajectory of the industry. So if you look at it, when we were talking about 1970s and so on and so forth, we still did not have a lot of computing power existing. So there was a time when we have now, for example, if I take an example right now, we have a mobile phone in our pocket, which has much more power and memory as compared to the first computer used on the lunar vehicle, right? So the access to technology changed a lot of things. The cost went down. And at the same time, people started to realize there are a lot of other things that can be done. I always believe in responsible capitalism, right? So when you are able to have profitable business models, people and entrepreneurs will start to look into that direction. This is exactly what happened to space, where you see this sudden growth of use cases coming in, only because you have access to those satellites, only because you have access to cheap launching vehicles. I mean, cheaper, if I can say so, only because you are able to compute the data that fast and bring benefits to humans here. Otherwise, things would have been just the same. So I think the credit goes to a lot of technological improvements that happened. And then it's just the struggle, political, social struggle that might delay a few things, but it's inevitable that space will continue to grow and it will become just like IT right now. So yeah.
No, absolutely, it's true, and it's kind of like the next internet era where there's going to be a lot of hype, I think, which is kind of what we're going through right now. There's a lot of hype going around, and at the end, it's going to be very, very useful, and you cannot live without the internet today, and kind of every company is an internet company today, and soon every company is also going to be a space company soon.
Exactly. We also might have to see the bubble, internet bubble.
Yeah.
There might be a space bubble sometimes in future, no?
Yeah, I wanted to share, so kind of a historical trajectory on this, and
Sure.
and I think Bharat brought up a really good point. It's a confluence point of a lot of technologies that have experienced exponential growth, and of course that exponential growth then reflects into the space industry as well. And I think miniaturization, Bharat, to complement what you said, is also very important for space, right? I mean, that really marked the era of small satellites, and all the Earth observation and satellite constellations that we see today are reliant on, that small satellite evolution in the development of, I would say, still space exploration. So I believe that there's a huge inflection point that we're experiencing right now in the industry.
Yeah. And this makes it really exciting for everyone to come and participate. Where you see students launching their satellites for their experiments. I would have never imagined this during my engineering days, where you would imagine satellites as a huge giant dinosaur going up in the sky, versus now seeing a small balloon flying up and students are able to experiment. So you can only imagine what's going to happen with those youngsters coming into the industry in a few years.
Absolutely, yeah, no, it is definitely becoming starting to become mainstream. I can put it that way. I think we still have some time to go before it gets very, very mainstream, like the internet. Going to the markets and different markets of space, and I know you guys have focused on some specialized markets of space, and I presented a few markets. Satellite internet, satellite data, satellite TV. Rockets, and I presented a bunch of markets for the 1 trillion economy. What do you think are the biggest markets from your perspective? Where is going to be the next trillion or the multi-trillion dollar coming from? Maybe Bharat, if you want to start there.
So I'll tend to stay with you what you were presenting, Aravind. I think the next few years, the focus would stay around downstream solutions, if I can call them so, because I mean what you're seeing on the slide here is the representative of the current situation. We have a lot of issues to be solved on the planet where you have money and specific. So I'm a big fan of lean startup, right? So many of the people might know here, so who are my good friends. So I believe when you are able to show minimum viable product, it's easier for the investors to put in the money. So when you're able to use those satellites to demonstrate downstream solutions which can really solve the issues existing, you'll see much more traction. You'll have much more money coming in, and that's where the movement starts in. But then we also know there's a lot of effort now coming into the lunar markets. For example, right now in Luxembourg, there's Space Week going on, Space Resource Week going on. And there's a lot of focus on the investments that might come into all the projects that are going to get into the space exploration program, finding water, for example, mining water in moon. Then space debris would become another issue. So, I mean, I can continue to talk about it, but just to compare it with internet, as you just mentioned a few minutes back, we could imagine infrastructure. What Cisco did to internet is what will be needed. So there's a lot of work that will be going behind the infrastructure, launches, satellites, et cetera. Parallelly, we will need some downstream solution coming in, space observation programs, all the data related use cases coming in. And then probably you'll see tourism and other long fetched program that might come into the picture in next 10 years or so. But absolutely. I'm putting my money right now on downstream solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think we kind of, both of us are aligned there. And maybe Yona is coming from the other perspective. And maybe there is a big market in low Earth orbit or, further than low Earth orbit. What do you think, Yona? Do you think that is going to be the case as well?
So, I want to make a couple of points here. One is connecting back to your slides, Aravind, and to your question, right? Should everything that's satellite-based be part of it, right? I think there needs to be a little bit of a clarification here of nomenclature, right? You have a space industry, and the space industry, there's an economy, there's a space economy that is associated to that space industry. And so I think absolutely satellites are part of that. But I think in terms of market, the satellite market itself is a separate segment. The Earth observation market is a separate segment, right? It's the same thing as asking, should the materials market be part of the automotive market? No, it shouldn't, right? Because while materials underlie automotive, I think automotive is, is a market in itself, right? So I think we need to try to make some comparisons. Having said that, and again, having kind of, without knowing, witnessing the growth of the new space industry, what was very interesting is, so at the space portal, we were talking with Bharat when I joined the space portal in 2012. I think the new space industry was in its very, very early infancy. And one of the programs that we run out of there was the Emerging Space Office, run out of NASA headquarters. And I think it's very important to emphasize this word emerging. At that time, it was an emerging economy. And of course, naturally, one of the questions is, how do you put a market value? How do you assign a market value to that? What's going to happen to that market? Is that market going to grow or not? What are the early signs, the early signals in a market that you can trust that the market is going to pick up and continue to build on them? And for example, to tie back to what Bharat said, we see here, right, the first Planet Lab Dove that was launched into space. So Planet Lab at that time was doing the manufacturing of the small sat. Was they during the launch, put a camera on the satellite, acquiring the imaging, analyzing the imaging. So everything, being done by one company. And what we've seen since that was that 2010, 2012 timeframe. Now we see the diversification of the value chain around that. So it's not just one player that does it all. Of course, planets and others are still at the core of that industry, but we've seen so many other companies coming in, and especially on the data, AI, machine learning, and so on. So when you see the value chain diversification and growth, then you know that market is moving from emerging to stability, and then to accelerated growth. So having said that, what are the signs? What do people believe that are the new wave of companies in new space, right? And definitely one that's been there, and people have talked about it in the past. Is space manufacturing. I don't know how many of you know, but today we actually do manufacture things in space, and that's this fiber optics area of fiber optics. Have those products being commercialized? No, not yet. Again, we see this in this space manufacturing in its early infancy, but the signals are there. So the question is now, what is what's that growth gonna look like compared to the growth of the Earth observation and small satellite market? So that's one question. The other one is, what will we see? So this is more talking about manufacturing products in space that have unique performance and unique characteristics for which a terrestrial customer wants to pay the premium. And that is $1 million question. We're actually addressing that at the G-Space. But there's also the other side of that coin on the importance of manufacturing things in space, because you really want to expand the infrastructure in the cislunar space. So right now we have a lot of satellites in low Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and geostationary orbit, right? LEO, MEO, GEO. But we have a lot of missions either to the moon or Mars, or a lot of planetary missions, right? Robotic missions. But traditionally, the industrial base for this mission has been terrestrial. And we're seeing more and more, again, from a cost perspective, the rationale of why build things terrestrially, de-risk them for the launch environment, and then fly them to the final destination, when actually we could manufacture and assemble several of these subsystem components in orbit and use the Earth orbit as a launching platform for all these missions. And definitely that changes the business model and the economics around several of these areas. So I still consider that partly part of space manufacturing and part of in-orbit servicing and assembly. So I think these are two areas of significant growth. We also see a lot of government investments going into what you mentioned originally, the lunar market. But there's been a lot of conversation, and there's a good conversation in terms of, again, building infrastructure in the cislunar space, right? So the similarity with building the railroad system across the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast, right? Instead of just going to a destination, how about we fill in the space towards that destination? Because that would enable multiple mission with multiple destination and a much more affordable manner. So you see, we see the same rationale of how can you make things more affordable, more accessible by building infrastructure and by optimizing that infrastructure and building on that infrastructure. Then you can see all these areas emerging that I believe will turn into a $1 trillion economy probably in the next 20 to 30 years.
Absolutely, I think your both of your perspectives are pretty bang on in terms of you can look at it in the short term and the midterm. The short term, the terrestrial market is probably going to dominate, and then in the midterm and the long term, in orbit manufacturing, and again at the end of the day, these are all applications for Earth or for use or on Earth. And I see that there are a couple of questions coming in, and yeah, for the audience, just feel free to have your questions written down in the Q&A section. We'll come to it in about 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes time. I want to move on to one of the questions that everybody asks me. I'm sure you have been asked the same question as well. Why do we need to, we've spoken about different applications of space on Earth, internet, weather, a lot of things, but the question that keeps coming back, and I don't know why we're continuously getting these questions, is why do we then still need to invest in space? Why should we go and launch stuff, build satellites? I'm asking this question for people who are still not fully convinced about what space is and why we need to go to space. You have challenges on Earth like COVID-19 that we're going through. Can you give us a few points of why we need to invest in space, in case somebody is still having that question, because I know that we get that a lot, right? Maybe Yona, you can start with that, and then we can move on.
Yeah, I actually was looking for a slide to share that I believe would explain it. I just found it, so let me share that. Share screen. Let me know if you see this slide. So I think we need to look at space from a global perspective and from many different angles of what are our problems that we, humanity, are currently facing on the surface of the Earth, right? So if you look on the left side of the slide, it's what I call for confluence, where we have a lot of issues with pollution, with climate change, ecosystem degradation. There was a Millennium Assessment run by the United Nations in 2005 that showed that out of 24 Earth ecosystem services, 17 are under severe degradation. So that was in 2005, right? And we're several years after, and we see a lot of the effects of that study and augmenting, not going away, right? Deforestation, a lot of garbage buildup, fossil fuels, and I think democracy in retreat in many different areas around the world, right? The COVID pandemic. So the underlying issue here is we tend to think of our life on this planet in a very limited and scarcity-driven way. We really think that there's going to be, and there is an issue globally, right, between the two forces that are shaping society, the global society, right? how do we enable economic growth and at the same time resource sustainability? And if you think of it from a closed system perspective, I'll make a parallel here with the physics, with the physics problem, right? If you think you live in a closed system, then yeah, it's absolutely, your mind is driven again by this limited resources, scarcity of resources. However, Earth is part of a very open physics system. We're part not only of the solar system, but we're part of a really, really huge universe that's full of resources. And so to me, this is we need to make a philosophical shift in our thinking, where we need to think of this new space confluence, where we can achieve both economic growth and sustainable future, which means we can reduce economic discrepancies across the globe if we tap into resources beyond the surface of the Earth, without, of course, hopefully repeating the trends of the past, right? We need to seriously take a look at what did history teach us in terms of what we did on planet Earth, and hopefully not repeat that when we go to space. But we do have an opportunity to expand outside the bounds of the planet Earth to achieve that rebalance, this philosophical, what seems to be a philosophical difficulty in merging a sustainable future and economic growth. And by tapping into resources outside of the bound of the Earth, we can really realize that there are unlimited resources, and we can shift that scarcity-driven mentality into an abundance-driven mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the slide does a very good job of showing everything that space provides for Earth. Bart, do you have anything to add? I'm sure you've also been asked this question a lot, especially at the time of the pandemic. Do you have anything to add here?
So yeah, I always get this question. I've had a lot of debates with many of my colleagues on that topic. But before I answer, I would just say that what Jana, you just showed, I cannot improve that answer, but can continue on the same line. I would, so I wanted to say the similar things, but I must go back to the time when first time humans started to go outside Earth's orbit, and they looked into this tiny blue planet. So we know this story, right? We call this as overview effect. This was the first time humans realized that we have something beautiful. I mean, I'm just taking a philosophical shift, as Jona was saying, and and if you look at the data, I do not have my slides with me, but this was the time when we saw a lot of initiatives were taken forward to where they started to talk about climate change. They started to talk about sustainability issues. And I would also take this point ahead that we should not see Earth as humans connected to just Earth. We are part of this big entity, right? So which is universe. And we need to see how do we move forward. So we talk about pandemic a lot because it's covered in the media in a very strong way, and it's a major issue. And I know a lot of people who have lost a lot of important things in this difficult times. But at the same time, we also have other issues on the Earth. So we have this poverty issue. We have, I think, every 30 seconds, we have one child who's being lost to malaria, if I'm correct. And now you see this digital connect that a satellite can bring in. A lot of companies are interested in putting in the money. So you have this, what I initially called responsible capitalism coming in, because you need money to flow in. We need to get rid of poverty. And this is where technological improvements will help. I never see space as space, something which is outside Earth. I see this as a technological improvement, the way I would look into any other thing which is existing on Earth, in the ocean, or wherever it is. So right now there's a momentum, people are interested, there's innovation happening, there are a lot of use cases. It makes only sense to generate more money. So nobody's asking to just put in the money and wasting it. We see a lot of returns coming out. So if I talk about NASA, and maybe Jona, you can correct me, Last time I checked, it was able to create $10 for every dollar spent as the public money, right? So that institution is creating a value in terms of money, but it is also creating this phenomena wherein money is being generated, a lot of use cases are coming in, and people are getting supported. So this is not even an argument for me. So I'll see space is not a destination, it's a domain, it's an ecosystem, it's an enabler for all of us, where we can work in if we have right skills and if we have right interests. Yeah.
Yeah, so no, absolutely good points, Bharat. And I think what I want to highlight here is it's hard to put a price tag. And I think we need to go back and reevaluate the concept behind a company or a corporation, right? We tend to talk about money, about return on investment, but fundamentally, the concept of a corporation or a business unit is to create value, and value is not equating always just money.
Correct.
I think that's very, very important, because we are kind of stuck in a reductionist model of value equal money. I mean, I'm not saying money is not important, but money is not the only thing, right? And so connecting back, and by the way, I wanted to put here, because you mentioned, Bharat, the overview effect, right? This was I tried to put this as a background to what you said, right? This was the very first picture of our own planet from taken from space, right? So connecting with that, this new space move, if you look at the definition of it, and I really like that, is creation of space for socio-economic benefit. So it's not just return of money, it's creation of value and social benefit. So it really is that attempt to connect both public benefit and return on investment. How do we do that? Really up to us. Maybe it is time to reevaluate the concept of a corporation and create a business unit that is specific to space, especially since space is now touching on really global problems, right? So if you really want to run a business fully globally, and you want to run a business in space, it will have to be a global entity. And so it becomes a legal question, right? What would, I was joking the other day with someone on, how about we create, instead of .com, we create .leo, right? And what does that domain look like in terms of the business entities that you can play with and generate? What should be in the legal DNA of business unit that is a space business that absolutely isn't terrestrially, but it does address and connect to what values do you want to preserve when you do business in space. And when I say that, so I understand that's more generic, but let's talk about space debris, right? Space debris has become a junk problem, right? So what value system do we want to put in a company so that we don't repeat the space junk problem when we create the next generation of businesses that have their primary ground of operating and creating value to space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fascinating discussion, and yeah, we can keep going, and I want to have some time for Q&A. So I want to ask one last question. Maybe that's going to come in the form of a Q&A as well, but maybe I'm asking for an audience. What can people do in the space industry? Because some people just assume that it's for rocket scientists and engineers, and that's about it. People studying in business school, people studying strategy, marketing. What do you see? Can they work in the space industry as well? What are your thoughts on them even becoming entrepreneurs in the space industry? Is that possible? What is there for the outsiders? That's kind of the question. Maybe Bharat, you can start, because obviously you have a different background, and you can still work in space. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that first.
Yeah, so definitely the answer is yes, anyone and everyone should be able to contribute. but staying prudent to what the industry demands. So you talked about the numbers, you talked about how the growth is going up and everything is happening. But at the same time, you see we do not have right resources in the industry. So everyone is struggling to find the right resources. All you need is, as I was saying, when I was working as consultants trying to solve problems for some of those industries, I realized the problems are very similar to what we have in the other companies, right? So you need these kind of people who are able to bring their problem-solving skills, but they need to understand how the space ecosystem is working. Even if they do not know how the physics behind a rocket launch would work, you don't have to restrict yourself, right? So we need a lot of people inside this industry. At the same time, the entrepreneur, I mean, everyone, maybe it's a cliche, everyone talks about Elon Musk. He's not coming from any other, let's say, traditional background you might see. Same for Richard Branson. So what you needed was what these guys were interested in doing. They had passion and they were able to find out where are those opportunities. So the difference I see between normal entrepreneurs, if I can call them so, the people who are starting different kind of technology, manufacturing, and different other businesses versus people who are trying to get into new space economies. The difference is that people are too scared. So they are not informed enough. There's lack of awareness. They are not able to understand sometimes that it's not that difficult to start. It's as similar to, so if you bring some kind of data science background, you can try to do something in that area by brainstorming and coming together with different other profiles. So people should not restrict. And I see a lot of regulations are coming in, a lot of countries are working in. I'm based out of Luxembourg. I know, for example, in Luxembourg, we have very interesting educational programs for people who are interested in getting inside space industry. So there's a Masters in Space program, right? Where people can come from any other background and have a little bit of mathematical understanding, can get inside that program and understand how things are moving. I know a lot of those guys who are coming from business and commerce background, finance background, who did this program and now working with European space agencies. So nobody should restrict. All you need is just some hunger. And yes, people like us, all of us here, we need to do much more work in terms of bringing the awareness around, especially to the youngsters. Yeah.
We have a few questions to go, but Yona, I want to give you a chance to add in as well if you have perspectives maybe from your experience, what you've seen from people coming from other industries.
Yeah, I think I want to make 3 points. I'll keep it very, very short so that we have time to address questions. To me, it's space, and especially where space is today in that inflection point, right? It offers so many opportunities, and we haven't really talked about the specifics of whether you're in biotech or in food growth or energy and so on, right? I mean, it really touches every single industry terrestrially, right? So are there other opportunities? Yes, absolutely. But it goes back to that value system. What kind and who we are as humans, and what kind of impact do we want to make? Because we do have an opportunity right now to reinvent ourselves, our society, the way we run our lives through the lens of space. And I think it's very important to take time and ponder on what is your individual value system. What is it your desire? Do you just want a job, or do you want to make a transformational change? And you understand that job comes with safety, but it also comes with maybe personal dissatisfaction on long term, versus if you really want to make a change, well, that comes with a price too, because you really, it's really important to define your value system and then defend that value system. And that's not easy. That takes a lot of hard work, but I think we need that more and more. And again, the reason I'm bringing that up here is because going into space, whether you come from data science or business or whatever, is what value system do you carry with you? when now we go and redefine life on Earth through the eyes of space.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that's beautifully put. And whatever people want to do in the space industry, they just need to understand, what their bigger purpose is, and based on that, they can definitely contribute. All right, I think we have about 1, 2, 3, 4 questions to go through. So let's keep it. And if you have, we can probably take one more. We can keep it to 2 minutes per question. The first question is, you mentioned you don't have time to go into a few industries, Yona, but there are questions about a specific industry. So maybe you can, give your perspective there. So the first question is energy. So energy and food, you mentioned. I think the question from Zishan is, where does energy come from? I think his question is more about, if you are talking about, in orbit manufacturing, assembly, etc. I think his question is, where do we get energy if it's not fossil-based? And what about food? How is food grown out of Earth? Maybe you can start with that, Yona.
Sure. So quickly about the energy. Actually, energy is a big issue terrestrially today, right? And there's been a lot of experts. I'm far from being an expert in that, but I definitely encourage you to look into the area of space solar power, because there's been a lot of study. I actually do have a quick summary of what are the pros and cons of space solar power on LinkedIn, so you can. I'm happy to share that later. But the fact that you can have direct or much more of a direct exposure to the energy coming from the sun, right? That is absolutely what everybody relies on in terms of a source of energy, a very potent source of energy into outer space. Now, not everything can be run through space solar power. We see a lot of investment going into electric propulsion, and even low nuclear reaction kind of propulsion for space transportation and so on. So definitely, I would say that the space economy, as we envision it happening in in the cislunar space, like I said before, would not be fossil based. So it wouldn't be reliant on terrestrial resources. So I think that's very important. And of course, people are also looking into powering. There's many companies. Look at Momentum Space. There's many companies that are looking at water as a source of propellant in space, and the source for that water could come from entire ice meteorites floating into space, right, or traveling through space these days. I think it's a very, very interesting problem. I definitely encourage you to look into that. In terms of food, there's again a whole industry there. I would encourage you to look into search for crops on Mars. Autogrow is a company based in New Zealand, and they ran this hackathon, and they said, well, what is the thinking underlying growth of crops if you were to sustain 100 people on Mars, or 1,000 people, or cities on Mars, or on Moon, right? And what kind of technologies would enable that crop growth, starting from seedling formation to caloric value, that we can learn from there, and then also apply it terrestrially. So that's just a quick overview here. I won't go into more details.
Absolutely, I think that hopefully that answers the question, Zishan. And Jean-Philippe asks, maybe it's a question for Bharat, because you're working in the manufacturing side of things. They're asking about raw materials. Do you need to carry them to space? How do we do raw materials in space? I think that's the question. Maybe, Yona, if you have an opinion as well, you can chime in. But Bharat, do you want to start?
I think Yona already touched upon this topic, that when she talked about manufacturing in space, right? So it will be, if we continue to build this infrastructure, getting into space, deeper inside the space, going to Mars, going to the Moon, and manufacturing in space, either for terrestrial use cases or for exploration, would make sense that we do it in the space. So there's a lot of effort happening around space mining. So there was this comment from Neil, I forgot his last name, the famous physicist. He talked about the first trillionaire would be the guy who's able to do successfully space mining from asteroids, right? So I think the space mining would change a lot of aspects where asteroid mining, you are able to get a lot of raw materials with manufacturing happening in the orbits or at the lunar surface. Would be very interesting, but I see this happening in not in the near future. Yeah, but I'm not the expert in this area, but Yona maybe.
Yeah, the only thing I would add there is, well, we consider several sources for raw material, and there's actually a lot of thinking going on right now into, you know, are we running out of you know, key raw material here terrestrially, and what would be ways to augment, and how do you plot the business case around that, of course. So I think it's a combination of, in the early beginning, like right now, whatever we see in terms of space manufacturing, the raw materials are being taken from the surface of the Earth into space. There's a second line of thought, and I really think that is very powerful, is to use this space junk and debris that's up there, and every single piece of debris has actually a huge price tag on it. It did cost quite a lot of money to put that debris up into space. So instead of trying to deorbit and burn it into the atmosphere, we better find some smart way to use that as feedstock that exists. It has become a source of raw materials in space. It's complicated, right, to go and extract atoms out of, you know, whatever is there, but it is a source of raw materials. And then we're talking, of course, about raw material that would originate from meteorites or asteroids, as well as from the surface of the moon.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we have a couple more minutes. We have 2 more questions to go through. There's a question on what companies are listed. I just sent a link about an ETF, an exchange traded fund by Kathy Wood, which should contain all the companies that you can take a look at. I want to move on to a question which we can talk about for quite a while, but it's a question about, is this the advent of the 5th industrial revolution? With new space, the advent of a 5th industrial revolution. Yona, if you can give a quick response to that. It's probably going to be a yes, so it's probably going to be a quick yes. But
actually, I was going to say I lost track if it should be the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, because even terrestrially, we're talking about the 5th terrestrial, you know, the industrial revolution, and it's a really interesting concept. Yes, I mean, you can look at it from so many different perspectives, but I would say that we need to find a different name for it. Instead of calling it an industrial revolution, I think we need to find another name for it, because industrialization comes with a very heavy price tag and kind of negative connotations. So that's my question there. But I mean, other than that, I really think this is an opportunity to reinvent and address the kind of negative path on which we're engaged here terrestrially. So I would just go along those lines.
Absolutely. And lastly, I think it's a question about I think what you mentioned, how are we regulating the space industry? You know, do we need to, who decides, you know, what's allowed and who benefits? You know, if you can give an overview of, it can be a concluding question to the session.
Yeah, Bharat, do you want to take that?
I mean, if that's one of the most interesting questions. I do not have an answer, because we do not know exactly how will it evolve. But I see, if I just talk about as an entrepreneur, a potential, let's say, contributor in the industry, I would say that there is a lot of business case for all the economies and the nations across the world to come together, specifically for this area. So if you just stay in and around Earth, you'll see there are a lot of differences across right now between the nations. But when there's a business opportunity, there's a business case. When I talk about business case, it's not just dollars, but the value, as we just talked about. But there's a business case for all of them to come together, collaborate. So we saw what collaboration did when there was pandemic and how people shared the knowledge with each other, and we had vaccination programs happening very quickly. So which something that we were missing. And I remember we have had a couple of discussions with Yona and rest of the team when we talked about the lunar programs from India and Israel and how this could have maybe we could have had different results if we were collaborating much more. So I think we see this phenomena, and the regulations are very complex right now, something which I would not even try to touch, because this is really complex right now. Nobody knows how it's going to develop. But I definitely believe personally that there is a strong windfall wherein something will emerge in a few years from now.
Absolutely. All right, I think we are running out of time. We are already 2 minutes late. So thanks everyone for the question. And yeah, hope the session was good. And Sabri, over to you. Thank you.